Every year in July, the people of La Paz, the capital city of Bolivia, lay down their burden of poverty and take to the streets. This is the People's Carnival. No banners, no marching men or uniformed dictators are on display. Honored guests like Thor Heyerdahl may be very welcome, but this spectacle is not designed for them. For this one day in the year, the city treats itself to an intricate and subtle tapestry of folk art with roots that lie deep in Bolivian history. At various times, the indigenous Indians have seen their homeland invaded by men who imposed their will by conquest and slavery. Quite suddenly, out of the midst of the pageant, Thor Heyerdahl saw what he'd been waiting for. A birdman, one of the oldest and most potent symbols of the great culture which once flourished beneath the towering Andes. Half bird, half human, the birdman has retained his magic down the centuries, ever since his image was carved on statues and works of art by the first civilized inhabitants of the region. Side by side with the sun god, the birdman was at the very heart of the religious rites practiced here by a people for whom this was the very center of the world. The once mighty city of Tiahuanaco, on the southern shores of Lake Titicaca. Today, some of the poorest people in South America eke out a living on this arid plateau 13,000 feet above the sea. "700 years ago, an elaborate system of irrigation canals provided food in abundance for a rich and powerful civilization. At first, it was thought that this pre-Inca culture was limited to the highland region around the lake, but more and more evidence has come to light, suggesting that this was the center of a huge empire, stretching for hundreds of miles both north and south.
These stones came from over there, is that right?
And they come from the far mountains, dragged overland, but what is interesting...
At its heart stood Tiahuanaco, which before its conquest by the Incas had reached the highest level of civilization to be found in South America. Before he made his famous voyage across the Pacific on a raft, which he named Kon-Tiki, Thor Heyerdahl had never been to this place. Now, 40 years later, he showed me the man-god Kon-Tiki himself. Weather-beaten but still daunting in his power, according to legend, this was the man who led his people across the sea towards the setting sun. I asked Thor whether they were quite different in appearance from the Inca who defeated them.
According to the Inca traditions, they were white and bearded men like the Spaniards. That doesn't mean that they were Europeans by any means.
At the base of what was once a pyramid, he showed me the quality of the stonework achieved by those early builders.
When the Bolivians excavated these walls, you find this type of perfect masonry, which we used to believe was Inca masonry, but as we see it now, we know that it is Tiahuanaco.
Conquest, a change in climate, or possibly an earthquake might have caused the sudden collapse of Tiahuanaco and its empire. But enough remains for us to see that some of its buildings were on a scale with those of ancient Egypt.
Here in Tiahuanaco, you have enormous blocks up to 20 tons or much more that have been transported by reed boat across the lake from the Capilla volcano, which is 50 kilometers away. All this goes to show that these people were not only great architects and engineers, but they were also good boat builders, and they knew what they were doing.
Even in the roughest weather, wooden rafts are still used to carry heavy loads on Lake Titicaca, though nowadays they ferry buses instead of temples. And far to the north, in the Colombian highlands, the story persists that once a year, a great king sailed out on a sacred raft into the middle of Lake Guatavita, his naked body anointed with resin and sprayed with gold dust. Then the watchers on the shore saw him dive in, washing off all the gold. This was the signal for his followers to hurl jewels and precious objects into the water. Exploring the banks of the Great Lake, we even found a small fisherman's raft made of balsa wood, just like the Kon-Tiki.
This balsa wood.
How far have these logs come, do you think?
Well, they must have brought them across the hills from the Bolivian jungle.
Well, not far, in fact.
Not far.
But at the time of your voyage, Thor, people thought there was no balsa on the lake.
Well, that was wrong, because when the first Spaniards came here, they found big rafts built of balsa wood on this lake. We have here evidence of 5,000 years tradition, because models of exactly this type of little balsa raft you find down on the coast of Arica from 3,000 years before Christ. And here we still find them in use on the lake.
From the lake, an ancient road, built long before the Spaniards or even the Inca passed this way, winds up into the mountains before threading its way down towards the sea. Scholars had long believed that Tiahuanaco was an inland empire, isolated from the coastal region by the mountains. Thor believed that the very existence of this road proved them wrong. In recent years, heavy rain has uncovered some remarkable findings along this part of the coast. The owners of a local museum showed Thor a collection of prehistoric fishing weights, exactly like the ones used on Lake Titicaca. And this model of a raft from the same pre-Inca period might have been a child's toy, but was much more probably designed to rest in the tomb of some notable seafarer of long ago. In shape and structure, it was like a miniature Kon-Tiki, complete with a square-rigged sail.
Well, that's fantastic. It really shows.
But the debate was settled once and for all when tombs were found outside the coastal town of Arica, not far to the south. Not only the funeral objects, but the very manner of burying the dead with their heads swathed in cotton shrouds corresponded exactly with the customs of Tiahuanaco. So if the man-god Tiki had indeed led the remnants of his people down from that high plateau, this was the route they had to take, to the very shores of the vast Pacific. Small balsa wood rafts are still regularly used by fishermen all along this coast. With the Kon-Tiki expedition, Thor Heyerdahl had set out to demonstrate that their forebears might well have handled much larger craft on voyages that lasted for months at a time. But even after that epic voyage, much of the scientific world remained skeptical. They wanted conclusive evidence, and it was not yet there. In January 1953, Thor turned his attention to the Galapagos Islands, 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. Charles Darwin had landed here a century earlier and made a study of the island's unique species, which led him eventually to his great theory of natural selection. But it was not the wildlife that attracted Thor Heyerdahl. A few months earlier, a letter had reached him containing a photograph of a mysterious statue. An American botanist claimed to have taken the picture on the Galapagos island of Floriana.
Immediately the conclusion was that the Polynesians must have been there, because it couldn't be American Indians. Everybody were sure that they never navigated off the coast. I was the only one who believed that it would be the other way around, because I was convinced that they were navigators, and I had tested the Kon-Tiki raft. So I immediately organized an expedition, the first archaeological expedition to the Galapagos, with one top American and one top Norwegian archaeologist. I chartered a ship from Ecuador and went with equipment and all that was needed for a major expedition.
Following a sketch map supplied by the American botanist, Thor led the way inland, only to find himself confronted by the biggest fiasco of his life. He had brought two distinguished scientists halfway across the world to study this remote figure from the past. Now that they were here, it was obvious that the statue was neither old nor mysterious. Someone had scratched a mouth and two eyes on either side of a lump of rock that might be taken for a nose. They soon learned that it had been done by a German settler, just to amuse his children.
Well, that was a terrible disappointment. It was really, I can hardly describe how bad it felt to have brought two professional archaeologists out there just to look at something that a German settler had made to entertain his own children.
But all was not lost. He told them that there were indeed man-made objects to be found on the islands. He'd even found fragments of pottery in his own chicken yard. Scratching around in the dust, the Norwegian archaeologist Arne Skjølsvold unearthed what appeared to be the remains of a terracotta flute, similar to ones he'd seen on the mainland, crafted by the Inca. But how had this one reached the Galapagos? In the time remaining to them, they resolved to visit as many of the Galapagos Islands as possible. It was a dangerous enterprise in their small launch. Spanish navigators had called them Las Islas Encantadas, the Enchanted Isles, because of the strong currents running between them. Sometimes they would set a course for a particular island in the evening, only to find that by morning it had vanished completely. The Galapagos are hot, dry and humid, but the upper slopes of these long extinct volcanoes are often shrouded in mist. It provides enough moisture to sustain the many varieties of cactus, the main source of food for the famous giant tortoises. Most of the creatures they disturbed were quite unaccustomed to the intrusion of human beings. The adults quickly made themselves scarce, or at least kept their distance. Thor and his companions were fairly certain now that they would find no evidence of permanent settlement. But by choosing the most obvious and accessible landing places, there was still a chance they might find traces of fishing or hunting expeditions. They were not disappointed. Very gradually, systematic searching began to reveal broken fragments of pottery, known to archaeologists as shards. When compared with complete museum pieces, the fragments were later identified as the work of the Chimu Indians from South America, who must have made frequent visits to the Galapagos over a long period of time. It could only mean that they possessed the means to come and go at will. Back on the mainland, Thor took a closer look at the dozens of small sailing rafts along the coast. In place of a keel, the fishermen appeared to be using movable centreboards, which could be slipped down between the logs. For the second time in his life, he set about building a balsa wood raft, this time equipped with these long guaras made of local hardwood. To begin with, the vessel simply spun round and proceeded on its way stern first. But gradually they began to learn the trick of manipulating the sail and the guaras at the same time. In this way, the Indians had learned to tack against the wind and so make their way back from the Galapagos.
Today, I think the Galapagos expedition was extremely important because it was the first concrete proof that there had been extensive navigation into the Pacific. That many sherds would never have been left on the island unless there had been really a large number of visitors throughout a long period of time. And of course, the Galapagos expedition led on to all the expeditions I organized later. It was the first time I brought archaeologists into the Pacific.
There had never been any doubt in Thor's mind that Easter Island would be the target for his next expedition. Not only was it the most isolated piece of inhabited land in the world, it was also one of the most mysterious. The first Europeans to discover the island had reported seeing lines of naked men standing beneath enormous statues who appeared to be paying homage to the rising sun. The statues themselves, huge sightless giants hewn from solid rock, were still one of the unsolved mysteries of the world. It was the Dutch navigator, Jacob Roggeveen, who first gave the island its name when he came ashore on Easter Sunday in 1722. But the local islanders have always had their own name for it, Te Pito o Te Henua, which means the navel of the world. This time, Thor had decided that he too must have his own ship. It would give him ample accommodation, refrigeration, a carpenter's shop, and if need be, the services of a qualified doctor. For the local people, almost all their previous encounters with strangers had been disastrous. The Dutch, the Spanish, the French, and the English had introduced guns, diseases, and hard labor, and the Peruvians had come in search of slaves. It was no wonder that the watching islanders were apprehensive. The beautiful bay of Anakena was selected as the expedition's base camp. And within a few days, a canvas village had sprung up, home for 22 people, including Thor's second wife Yvonne and his 2 young children.
I can see it's absolutely beautiful, but why did you choose it?
Now, 30 years later, as we walked up from the beach, Thor told me that they'd chosen this site for a camp in order to be as far away as possible from the populated end of the island.
Yes. Was that the only reason?
No, it was not. It was also because this, according to local legend, is where the first king, Hotomatua, came ashore.
But there's no real evidence for that.
Well, there's a very strong oral tradition that King Hotomatua landed in this bay after his voyage from the east. According to tradition, he came from the east, sailing towards the setting sun, and came here with his queen, Avareipua.
As a scientist, how much attention should you pay to oral evidence?
I think they can lead you in the correct direction very often. And the more I have learned about these people, to them history was part of their religion. They wouldn't forget it in one generation. And I've learned throughout all these years that what they've told me, even when it was something that sounded unbelievable, when it has been possible to check it, it has proven correct.
Much to the delight of his children, Thor had brought a jeep with him on the ship. It was the first vehicle the local people had ever seen. The island comes under the sovereignty of Chile, and before work could begin, Thor had to pay his respects to the governor. And there was another equally important person waiting to meet him. This was Father Sebastian, head of the Catholic mission. Fortunately, the two men took to each other immediately. In the days ahead, the friendly priest could be seen hauling on ropes like any other member of the expedition.
He was a fabulous personality. He made a great impression on me, both as a scholar and a scientist, and also as a human being. I remember particularly one time when all the school children came over in a boat, and there was an accident, and two little children actually drowned. And we helped everybody up into our tents, and some of the islanders used the opportunity to steal from us. And Father Sebastian was terribly distressed at the theft. And I said, but Father Sebastian, why worry about the theft? What about these children? And you know what his answer was? We all have to die, but we don't have to steal.
At some cataclysmic moment in the past, most of the great statues all over the island had been forcibly hurled to the ground. It might have been the result of an invasion, or perhaps a violent uprising by oppressed people, forced against their will to do the endless work of carving. No one knew. These were some of the mysteries Thor Heyerdahl's expedition had come to unravel. On this one island, in the whole vast expanse of the Pacific, a prehistoric race of men had started to devote all their energies to carving more and more of these gigantic and almost identical sculptures. What caused this period of frenzied, almost fanatical activity? And why did it so abruptly end? Surprisingly, before Thor's party arrived in 1955, there had been only 2 archaeological expeditions to Easter Island. The first was led by an Englishwoman called Kathleen Routledge in 1914. She carefully mapped and listed over 400 statues, but made no attempt at excavation. 20 years later, a Franco-Belgian team arrived. They made a study of some rock drawings, but showed little interest in the statues.
Seeing this for the first time must have been an extraordinary experience.
Well, of course. I mean, to get close to these figures and to touch them, and it's a completely different feeling altogether. And really, to get acquainted with them, I must admit that I Went up and slept in the quarry one night to see them day and night, and it leaves a real terrific impression.
Isn't it very strange that excavation took place so late?
Well, you know that before I launched the theory that the first migration came from South America, it was a common belief that they came from Asia, and then this would be the last island populated, and no time for soil to accumulate, so there would be nothing to dig for. I had the opposite view, that they came from South America. This was the first island populated, and thus there would be a lot of soil. Yes.
Near the eastern end of the island, gaunt against the sky, stands the extinct volcano of Rono Raraku. It's one of many such craters, but the only one that was ever used as a quarry for the statues. For some mystical reason now lost to us forever, this place, and this alone, was considered suitable for the carving to take place. Throughout the South Seas, no work has ever been found resembling this. But many scientists still believe it was done by Polynesians, a view that Thor Heyerdahl has never shared.
I've lived 1 year among the Polynesians in the Marquesas Islands, and I knew that this is not the kind of work they would do. They are happy if they can collect the bananas and the breadfruit they need for the day, and they would not have anybody telling them to work like slaves in masses. So I felt very strongly, here we have some branch of the great prehistoric civilizations of the world. And I felt that way ever since.
It seems to have been a period of the most frenzied activity, with everybody's efforts devoted to this one thing, building more and more of these gigantic statues.
Yes, it made me really wonder why this one island out of thousands and thousands in the Pacific. It could be two reasons. If they came from South America, it would be the first island inhabited and not the last, as the Orthodox science thought. But it could also be that it is the most lonely inhabited island in the world. So maybe people that have been harassed by wars and troubles everywhere would pick this as sort of a refuge center, and it could be sort of a temple island, because there is no limit to what has been done on this island in prehistoric time.
One day, Arne Skjølsvold, who'd been with Thor in the Galapagos, began to take an interest in a large lump of stone lying halfway up the side of the crater. Once it was upright, they saw that it was in fact a statue in a kneeling position, quite unlike all the others on the island, but very similar to several that Thor had seen in South America, as he showed me when we were together in Bolivia.
You see, this kneeling statue brought from Tiahuanaco to La Paz has the same strange kneeling pose with hands on the knees, and the same physiognomy with the goatee beard and the eyebrows ending in big sagging pouches under the eyes.
But is there still the slightest possibility that these two traditions could have grown up quite separately?
It is very strange, because it is one common type in Tiahuanaco, typical for Tiahuanaco, and then you find that we have no three on Easter Island, and there are none else in all the Pacific. So it would be a strange coincidence.
Seeds might be carried on the wind, but not statues. For the first time, a direct cultural link had apparently been established between Easter Island and the South American mainland. This was Thor Heyerdahl's second successful collaboration with Arne Skjølsvold, who still remembers the song that the islanders composed to celebrate the discovery.
Iterea återvänta och Norvega. Iterea återvänta och Norvega. Crea Kon-Tiki Man.
But could there really have been regular contact between South America and this tiny speck of land 4,000 miles to the west? Just to find the place would have required sailing and navigational skills of a very high order indeed. It was at this point that Arne Skjølsvold made another important discovery. Digging round the base of one of the statues, now revealed as complete figures, he uncovered a carving of a three-masted ship cut into the stone. Clearly, the sculptor was accustomed to seeing boats of a considerable size. But how were they constructed? The totora reeds growing inside one of the craters were the raw material for small paddling rafts, little more than floats, that the islanders used for fishing trips. Out of curiosity, Thor asked them to build something a little sturdier, to see how it would fare in the ocean. He remembered watching very similar craft tackling the heavy surf off the coast of Peru. An idea was beginning to form in the back of his mind. Up to that moment, he'd imagined that wooden rafts made from logs would have been the only vessels capable of carrying early man on voyages across the ocean. But reed ships suggested even greater possibilities. There are really two Easter Islands, one above ground and one below. Just under the surface, a honeycomb of caves and secret passages stretches out in all directions, some of them so secret that their whereabouts is only known by a single family. Long negotiations took place before Thor managed to obtain permission to explore some of the caves, and special rites had to be performed to appease the spirits that stood guard over them. Once inside, there was a real danger of getting stuck in the twisting man-made passages. But the caves themselves were remarkably spacious. Before important ceremonies, it was the custom for young virgins to be confined below ground for months at a time away from the light, to make their skin as fair as possible. By now, Thor had so gained the confidence of the islanders that they even allowed him to bring up some of the most sacred objects into the light of day. A unique and macabre collection of mysterious carvings emerged from the caves. Mythical creatures from the deep, and stone heads of bearded men with greatly extended ears. At one point, the islanders had been obliged to hide these wooden tablets, inscribed with the hieroglyphics of their own language, to prevent the Christian missionaries from burning them.
Very well preserved.
Charred but safe, They're now in a museum in Chile, together with symbols of a birdman. The same birdman that Thor had seen on the walls of Tiahuanaco, high up in the South American Andes. And the same birdman who had so recently danced through the streets of La Paz at carnival time. The rocks at Orongo, Easter Island's most southerly point, are covered with birdmen. For here, each year, a sacred ritual was performed. In a modern reenactment, we watched as the island's strongest men crept out from caves for a ritual race to bring back the first tern's egg from the top of Motunui Rock, hundreds of feet below. According to legend, the winner would have his head shaved and painted red before being paraded round the island in procession as the sacred birdman of the year. Thor had heard that these traditions belonged to the long-eared people, first portrayed by an artist who was with Captain Cook's expedition in 1774. Today, such people are nowhere to be seen, but some of the islanders knew the legend of what happened to the long-ears, who had their final stronghold at a place called Påsköns. To keep out the hostile short-ears, a huge trench was built and filled with brushwood. But one night, a party of short-ears managed to cross it and take up a position behind their enemies. Then, as the main army advanced from the plains, at once the long-ears set fire to the brushwood, only to find themselves attacked from behind and driven into their own fiery defences. Convinced that the legend was true, Father Sebastian persuaded Thor to carry out some excavations along a line believed by many to be the old trench. They found no human remains, but at a certain depth a band of charcoal was clearly visible. According to the story, only one of the long-ears escaped alive. To father a long line of descendants, leading right down to this man, whose name was Pedro Atarn, the mayor of Easter Island at the time of Thor's first visit. If the local legends were to be believed, the first inhabitants had been the long-ears arriving from South America. They were the statue carvers. Then, at a much later date, successive waves of short-eared people, ancestors of the Polynesians, began to arrive, crossing the Pacific from island to island, until the long-ears were outnumbered and overthrown. The mayor agreed to show Thor how the stone cutting in the quarry had actually been done. But first, in a special ceremony to placate the evil spirits, a sacred birdman was brought forth. In the morning, Thor made his way up to the quarry to find the mayor and 5 other men already at work. All of them claimed descent from the long-ears, the only people on the island, so they said, who still possessed the secret skills needed for the work. There was a limit to the number of men who could work side by side at the rock face, and Thor calculated that to carve a medium-sized statue would take about 12 months. With Thor, I climbed up to the rim of the crater to find out how they handled the statues once they were cut free from the rock.
Is this one completely detached?
Yes, it's all ready to go.
So what do? Just roll it down the hill?
Oh no, if it rolled down here, it would be broken to bits before it came down. It was lowered down, as tradition says, by rope. Big cables probably attached to the posts which they'd set in the holes on top here. Now we're on the very rim of the crater, huh?
So they could lower them down both sides?
Oh yes.
Amazing, isn't it?
And these big holes are obviously for posts, as the island tradition says. And it could only be used for very, very big trunks.
For the price of $100, the mayor then announced that he was prepared to reveal another secret, just how the statues had been raised into an upright position. Using wooden poles for levers and a huge quantity of boulders and stones, the 30-ton monster slowly began to raise its head. Thor's wife Yvonne wasn't taking any chances with the mayor's engineering skills. Thor tried to imagine what it must have been like when the carving and raising of these statues had been the island's one compulsive preoccupation. It was hardly an artistic flowering. Something much closer to religious fanaticism must have gripped the entire population. It took 18 days of intensive labor to raise just one statue. But what Thor still didn't understand was how they were moved to their final positions, sometimes many miles away from the Ranu-Raraku crater, where all of them were made. Lured by the promise of a feast, dozens of islanders volunteered to see if it was possible to drag a statue along the ground without damaging it. But this time the mayor would have none of it. Our forefathers have told us, he said. The statues walked. For once, Thor refused to listen to those ancestral voices from the past. In the real world, statues don't walk. Or do they?
And we needed 180 men to move a medium-sized statue just a short distance over the sand. So we felt that, no, we knew how it could be done, but the mayor and his men said, well, but this was not the way it was done before they walked.
There was to be a gap of 30 years before Thor Heyerdahl set foot on Easter Island once more. During his long absence, this man from the far north, who seemed to know how to unlock the secrets of their past, had become a kind of demigod. This was more than a welcome. It was a welcome home. As for Thor, wherever he'd been in the world, one phrase lay lodged in the back of his mind, like a voice from a dream. The statues walked. But how could they walk, except in dreams? The statues themselves had lost none of their magic and power, but they were beginning to lose some of their mystery. A young man named Sergio Rapu, the island's first homegrown archaeologist, had discovered an eye made from coral, which fitted perfectly into the stone socket of one of the statues. It was beginning to look as if the sightless giants had once had the power to see into men's souls. To Thor, this came as no surprise. In one of his books, he'd already published photographs showing the similarity between the statues of Easter Island and those of the Aztecs in Mexico and the Hittites in faraway Syria. The one missing link had been the inlaid eyes. Thor Heyerdahl had brought with him an engineer from Czechoslovakia who thought he'd worked out a method of making the statues move. His name was Pavel.
There'll be more friction in the movement, yes?
Yes.
I see.
The mayor had long since died, but another old islander was prepared to demonstrate the secret rocking motion, known in his family for generations but never before divulged. This, he said, this is how it was done. Before starting work, Thor went off to take a much closer look at some of the statues themselves than he ever had before. First, he found that some of those near the quarry had snapped cleanly in half, suggesting they must have fallen from an upright position. Then he noticed that the further the statues were from the quarry, the more rounded and worn they were at the base. This would not have been the case if they'd been dragged along on their backs.
So I think it's okay. It's better if you pull it further down than to leave it like this.
Up and down the island, prayers and incantations were uttered when it became known that next day, for the first time in centuries, one of the giant statues might walk again. Pavel had no means of talking to the islanders, but like a conductor with his baton, he knew how to make himself understood. His plan was based on an elaborate system of ropes. Gradually, the teams developed a rhythmic coordination. And sure enough, the giant statue began to waddle forward, rocking from side to side like some late-night reveller on his way home. Motion seemed to give the statue life. The cold stone was transformed into some huge primeval ancestor brought back from the dead. To the islanders themselves, it must have been truly awe-inspiring. Statues that walked had long been part of their timeless folklore. Now, before their eyes, they saw it happening. On Easter Island, Thor Heyerdahl used a combination of experiment and research, just as he had with the Kon-Tiki voyage. There are scientists who distrust his methods and disagree with his findings. They think he puts too much emphasis on myths and legends. But the islanders have no such doubts. Their ancestors have known these things since the beginnings of time.